I picked up the phone expecting to close on my dream house, but instead I heard the sound of my son severing my life support. The teller's voice was calm, professional, and devastating. "Sir, those funds were wired out weeks ago." The room tilted as I realized he hadn't just stolen $650,000. He was plotting to erase my existence to cover his tracks. If you want to see how a father takes down his own flesh and blood, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this is going to get ugly. He thought he could flatline me, but he forgot that I spent 40 years bringing the dead back to life, and I was about to cut him out like a tumor. Today the flow was supposed to bring me home. I picked up the landline. The plastic felt cold. I looked at the notepad where I had written the number for First Republic Bank, right next to a doodle of a pine tree. I punched the buttons one by one. Beep, 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 First Republic Bank. A woman's voice answered. It was professional, warm, polished. "How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to a teller, please," I said. My voice was calm. "Connecting you now." The line clicked, followed by hold music. A soft, generic jazz tune played, a saxophone wandering aimlessly. "How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to a teller, please," I said. My voice was calm. "Connecting you now." The line clicked, followed by hold music. A soft, generic jazz tune played, a saxophone wandering aimlessly. I looked over at the refrigerator. A photo of Eleanor was held there by a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. She was smiling, that half smile she used to give me when I told a joke she didn't think was funny, but loved anyway. "Almost there, Ellen," I thought. "We're almost back." "Tell her this is Susan." A new voice cut in. "Hi, Susan. This is Arthur Vance." I cleared my throat, shifting my weight. "I'm calling to withdraw my certificate of deposit funds." I tapped my fingers on the countertop, counting the beats. 1, 2, 3. "Account ending in 4420, I said, my diction precise. "I have a house closing on the 28th. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance," Susan said. Her typing clattered in the background. "That's exciting. Let me pull that up for you." I waited. I listened to the keys clicking. It was the sound of the system working, the gears turning, the money moving from the vault to my life. And then the typing stopped. It didn't slow down. It didn't fade. It stopped dead. In my line of work, silence is the enemy. Silence means the pump has failed. Silence means the pressure has dropped to zero. "Susan?" I asked. The pause stretched out. 2 seconds. 4. "Mr. Vance?" Her voice had changed. The professional warmth had evaporated, replaced by a tight, confused tone. "Yes? Mr. Vance? That account was closed 2 weeks ago." The air left the room. It felt as if a window had been blown out, sucking the oxygen into the winter afternoon. "Closed?" I whispered. The word felt foreign in my mouth. "That's impossible," I said, louder this time. I gripped the edge of the counter. "I have $650,000 in there. That is my life savings. That is the sale of my farm." "I'm sorry, sir," Susan said, her voice shrinking. "The funds were wired out on December 12th. "Wired? By who?" "I'm looking at the authorization here." She hesitated. I could hear her squinting at a screen, trying to make sense of a disaster. It was authorized by the co-trustee, Richard Vance. "Richard, my oldest son, my boy, the one who wore suits that cost more than my first car, the one everyone called a success story." The kitchen tilted. The black and white tiles of the floor seemed to rush up toward me. Where?" I rasped. My throat felt like it was filled with sand. "Where did the money go?" "The memo line," Susan read, "says property acquisition, Miami, Florida. Miami, Richard lived in Miami. He had bought property with my money, with the money from the land I had sold, with the money that was supposed to fulfill the last promise I made to a dying woman." "Sir, are you there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I just let the receiver drop into the cradle. My knees gave out. I didn't try to catch myself. I hit the linoleum hard. Thud. I sat on the cold floor, my legs sprawled out in front of me. The house was perfectly silent. No jazz music. No typing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the wind rattling the window pane. $650,000. Gone. It wasn't just cash. It wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was Eleanor's porch. It was the lake view she had made me promise to get back. "Buy back the lake house, Arthur. Promise me." I had held her hand while she died, and I had promised. I pulled my knees to my chest. I sat there as the afternoon light faded into gray, watching the dust motes dance in the dying ed. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest, deeper than the winter air. It was the coldness of a heart that realizes, for the first time, that it is beating all alone. Memory is a strange mechanic. It doesn't flow linearly. It pulses. As I sat on the linoleum, the cold seeping into my jeans, the kitchen dissolved. The smell of lemon polish was replaced by the stinging scent of isopropyl alcohol and wilting lilies. 4 years ago, the hospital room had been dim, lit only by the glowing monitors that I knew too well. I spent my life watching those lines, green for rhythm, red for pressure. But watching them for a stranger is a job. Watching them for your wife is a slow-motion execution. Eleanor lay in the bed, her frame so small, she barely made a dent in the mattress. Her skin was translucent, like parchment held up to a candle. "Arthur," she rasped. Her voice was a dry leaf skittering on pavement. I took her hand. It was cold. Not the cold of winter, but the deep internal cold of a system shutting down. "I'm here, El, the lake house," she whispered. Her eyes, usually so sharp, were cloudy. "Buy it back. Promise me." We had lost our dream home 20 years prior. Medical bills, the recession, 1,000 small cuts that bled us dry. Leaving that porch with its view of the water turning gold in the sunset had broken something in her that never quite healed. "I promise, El," I said. I squeezed her hand, trying to push some of my own warmth into her. "Soon as I can, I promise." She died 3 hours later. I watched the green line flatten. I watched the number hit 0. I didn't call the nurse immediately. I just held her hand until the room went quiet, locking that promise into the marrow of my bones. June brought the eminent domain settlement. The state needed my family's farmland for a highway expansion. I didn't fight them. When the check for $650,000 arrived, I didn't see currency. I saw the lake house. I saw Eleanor's ghost waiting on the porch. Then came July, and Richard. I stood up from the kitchen floor, my joints popping. I needed to move. I needed to act. But the memory of Richard sitting at this very table 5 months ago pinned me in place. He had driven up in his Porsche, a sleek silver bullet that looked ridiculous in my gravel driveway. He wore a suit that whispered money, Italian wool silk tie, cufflinks that caught the light. "Dad," he had said, sipping the coffee I'd brewed. He grimaced slightly. It wasn't the artisanal roast he was used to in Miami. You can't keep that kind of cash in a checking account. It's reckless. "It's only for a few months, Richie, until the house comes on the market. A few months is all it takes for fraud to happen. Or a free—" He leaned in, his expression the picture of filial concern. "Put it in a CD at First Republic, high yield, safe." He adjusted his tie. "And add my name as co-trustee. Just for emergencies. I don't need a co-trustee, son. I'm 72. Not senile." "I know, Dad. You're sharp as a tack." He smiled. That charming practiced smile that sold stocks to strangers. "But what if you have a stroke? What if you're incapacitated for a week? The money freezes. You lose the house. If I'm on there, I can access it for you. It's just a safety valve. A bypass." I trusted him. He was my blood. He was the boy I taught to fish. I walked to the phone again. My thumb hovered over his name in the contacts list. "Richard, Mobile." I pressed call. Ring. Ring. "Dad?" His voice was casual. Breezy. I could hear background noise, clinking silverware, the murmur of a restaurant. He was eating lunch. He was living his life. "What's up?" he asked. He sounded like a man without a care in the world. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "The bank says the CD is empty, Richard. I waited for the shock. I waited for the sharp intake of breath. The wet. That's impossible." Instead, there was a pause, a wet sound. He was chewing. I moved it, Dad. The casualness of it hit me like a physical blow. "You moved it to a better investment," he said, swallowing. "That lake house is a money pit, Arthur. I had a contractor look at the listing. The roof is shot. The foundation's cracking. You'd be bleeding cash for a decade. I didn't ask you to evaluate the roof, I said, my voice rising, shaking the quiet air of the kitchen. I asked you to leave my money alone. I bought a condo in Miami instead, he continued, talking over me. Pre-construction. It's an asset. It'll appreciate 15% by next year. It's smart. I didn't ask for an asset, I shouted. The sound bounced off the walls, harsh and ugly. I asked for my home. Put it back, Richard. Transfer it back today. You're being emotional. The tone shifted. It wasn't the respectful son anymore. It was patronizing, clinical. Like he was speaking to a toddler having a tantrum. You're not thinking clearly, he said. You're fixated on this nostalgia trip. It's not healthy. Give me my money. It's our money now, technically. The account was joined, he sighed. A sound of exaggerated patience. And Dad, honestly, you sound confused. You've been forgetting things lately. I am not confused. Maybe we need to discuss your living situation, he said softly. The threat hung there, invisible and sharp. You're getting older, living alone in that big house. Maybe it's too much for you. My heart hammered against my ribs, an erratic, terrified rhythm. He wasn't just stealing the money, he was rewriting reality. He was gaslighting me. I'm hanging up, I said. Dad, don't be irrational. I slammed the phone down. I stood there, panting, the adrenaline flooding my system. I needed air. The house felt suddenly small, a cage closing in. I walked to the front door and threw it open. The cold winter air slapped my face, shocking my lungs. Miss Higgins, Martha, was standing on my porch, her hand raised to knock. She was my nearest neighbor, a widow who watched the neighborhood with the vigilance of a hawk. Usually she wore a bright smile and carried a casserole dish. Today she held the dish, but her face was pale, her eyes wide. Arthur, she whispered. I heard yelling. Just nothing, Martha, I said, trying to compose my face. Just family business. It's not nothing. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. She looked over her shoulder at the empty street, as if she expected to be watched. I saw him, Arthur. My stomach dropped. Saw who? Richard. Last week. He was in Miami last week, I said automatically. No, she shook her head firmly. He was here, at the end of your driveway. He pulled up in a rental car, a dark sedan. When, Tuesday, around noon, you were at the grocery store. She shifted the casserole dish, her hands trembling slightly. He went to your mailbox. Arthur? He took the blue envelope, the bank statement. The world tilted again. He had been intercepting the mail. He knew I'd see the withdrawal notice. He had flown 1,000 miles just to hide the evidence. And Arthur? Martha whispered, leaning in closer. He wasn't alone. Who was with him? A man, tall, a nasty scar on his neck, right here. She traced a line down her own throat. They were arguing, in the car. Arguing about what? Money, she said. I was gardening near the hedge. I heard Richard say, I need more time. And the man, he grabbed Richard's arm. Richard looked scared. Arthur, he looked terrified. Thank you, Martha, I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I took the dish from her hands. Go home. Lock your door. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the wood. Richard wasn't investing in a condo. He wasn't trying to protect me from a bad roof. He was running, and he had dragged me into the getaway car. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the armchair in the living room, the casserole dish cooling on the coffee table in front of me. The house was pitch black, save for the blue-white glow of the street lamp filtering through the sheer curtains. The heating system kicked on, a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, sounding like a beast waking up in the basement. Martha's words replayed in my head on a loop. A man with a scar. Richard looked scared. I closed my eyes and tried to picture Richard, not the man in the suit I saw 5 months ago, but the boy, the teenager, who cried when he crashed my car, the young man who promised he'd make the family proud. How does a man go from I want to make you proud to stealing his father's grave money? My cell phone vibrated against my thigh. The sound was sudden, violent, in the silence. I stared at the screen. Michael, my younger son, the high school history teacher, the one who drove a 10-year-old Honda and still apologized for not being able to afford big Christmas gifts. He didn't have Richard's portfolio, but he had something Richard lost a long time ago. A conscience. I slid my thumb across the screen. Hello, Michael. Dad, his voice was tight, whispered. It sounded like he was hiding in a closet. Michael, is everything okay? Dad, listen to me very carefully, he said. The urgency in his tone made me sit up straight, my back cracking. Do not go to Richard's for Christmas. Do not answer his calls. Why? Michael, what's going on? I just spoke to the bank. I know about the money, Dad. Or, I suspected. He took a ragged breath. I'm at his house now. Richard and Jessica are out at some gala. I was supposed to be babysitting the dog, but I saw his laptop open on the counter. What did you see? I saw the browser history, Dad. I saw the emails. Is it the condo? I asked, a desperate hope flaring up. Is it the investment in Miami? No, Michael spat the word out. It's not a condo. It's never been a condo. It's poker stars. It's DraftKings. It's offshore crypto casinos. The words floated in the air, nonsensical at first. Gambling? He's in deep, Dad. You have no idea. I looked at the withdrawals. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. Every week. Michael's voice cracked. He's been bleeding out for 2 years. He lost his own savings. Then he maxed out his credit cards, and then he took mine. I finished. The coldness in my chest solidified into a heavy stone. He owes people, Dad. Bad people. Michael lowered his voice further. I found an email thread. There are threats. Physical threats. He didn't steal your money to get rich. He stole it to stop them from breaking his legs. The man with the scar. Martha was right. I felt a wave of nausea. My son wasn't just a thief. He was a desperate junkie. The $650,000 wasn't sitting in an account waiting to be retrieved. It was gone. It had been fed into a digital machine, eaten by algorithms and sharks. He's sick, I whispered. My God, he's sick. It gets worse, Michael said. There was a pause, heavy and terrifying. Dad, are you sitting down? I'm sitting. I found a folder on his desktop. It's labeled Arthur, Legal. Legal? What does he need legal papers for? He's been talking to a lawyer, a specialist in elder law. Michael's voice trembled. I read the draft emails. He's not planning to pay you back, Dad. He knows he can't. So he's planning to make sure you can't ask for it. What do you mean? He's filing for an emergency conservatorship. The word hung in the darkness between us. Conservatorship. I knew the term. We saw it in the hospital sometimes. It was a legal tool used for patients who were comatose or severely brain damaged that stripped a person of their rights. Their right to access their money, their right to make medical decisions, their right to choose where they lived. It transferred all power to a guardian. He wants to declare me incompetent? I asked. My voice was dangerously calm. He's building a case, Michael said. He's logging every time you forget a name, every time you get angry. He recorded your call today, Dad. The file is right here. He's going to use your anger as proof of dementia-induced aggression. He wants to lock me up, I realized. The horror of it was absolute. To hide the theft. He controls your finances as your conservator, Michael said. He doesn't have to explain where the money went. He becomes the only one allowed to look at the accounts. He buries the crime by burying you. I looked around my dark living room. The shadows suddenly seemed longer, reaching out from the corners. My own home felt like a waiting room for a prison. Dad, Michael asked, say something. He's not my son, I said. The words tasted like ash. Not anymore. I downloaded everything onto a flash drive, Michael said. I'm leaving now. I'm coming to you. No, I said sharply. Go home to your wife. If he knows you know, I don't want you in the crossfire. Not with the people he owes. But I need to think, Michael. I need to think like a surgeon. I stood up. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He wants a fight. He thinks I'm a feeble old man. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow. I spent 40 years keeping dead men alive, I whispered. I know how to survive a flatline. Dad, please be careful. Dan. I love you, Michael. I hung up. I stood there for a long time. The silence of the house had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a threat. Richard was coming for me. Not with a gun, but with a pen. He was going to use the law to strip me of my humanity. I walked to the hallway mirror. I looked at my reflection in the gloom. Gray hair, wrinkles around the eyes, a slightly stooped posture. Is this what a victim looks like? I asked the man in the glass. No, the man in the glass seemed to answer. This is what a witness looks like. I went to the front door and double-locked it. Then I went to the kitchen drawer and took out the heavy flashlight. I sat in the dark, facing the door, and I waited. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The world outside was wrapped in the soft, muffled quiet of a holy night. Inside, my house felt like a bunker. I hadn't slept. I had moved from the armchair to the kitchen table, watching the driveway through the slats of the blinds. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, a dark, stagnant pool. I wasn't waiting for Santa Claus. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. At 2:14 p.m., a gray van turned off the main road. It wasn't a family car. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a utility vehicle, unmarked, coated in road salt and grime. It crunched up my driveway, the tires packing the fresh snow into ice. I didn't move. I stopped breathing. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. A man stepped out. He wore a thick parka and held a clipboard. He didn't look at the house. He looked at the number on the mailbox to verify he had the right target. He walked up the path, his boots heavy on the stone steps. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He knew I was there. He probably saw the shadow in the window, but he didn't care to speak to me. I heard the scratch of packing tape being pulled from a dispenser. He slapped a thick manila envelope against the glass of my storm door. He smoothed the tape over the corners with a practiced hand. Then he turned around, walked back to his van, and drove away. He had delivered a bomb and left before the explosion. I waited until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Then I unlocked the door. The wind cut through my flannel shirt, biting my skin. I ripped the tape off the glass. The envelope was heavy, thick, official. I carried it to the kitchen table and turned on the overhead light. The fluorescent bulb flickered and hummed, casting a stark, sterile glare on the papers. I sat down. I put on my reading glasses. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together for a moment to steady them. Superior Court of the State of Vermont petition for emergency conservatorship. Petitioner Richard Vance. Respondent Arthur Vance. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. It was like looking at an X-ray of a tumor you didn't know you had. Allegations. The respondent exhibits signs of severe cognitive decline, including paranoia, aggression, and financial mismanagement. The respondent has made irrational claims regarding missing funds. The respondent is a danger to his own estate. He had done it. He had taken my anger, the righteous anger of a man who had been robbed, and twisted it into a diagnosis. Every time I had shouted, every time I had demanded my money, I was just digging the hole deeper. I turned the page. My breath hitched. Exhibit A, medical affidavit of incapacity. Signed, Dr. Julian Vance, M.D. Julian. My nephew, Richard's cousin. The room spun. I remembered Julian sitting at this very table, 10 years ago, crying because he couldn't afford med school tuition. I remembered writing the check. I remembered telling him, "The world needs good doctors, Julian. Go save lives." I looked at the signature. It was messy, hurried. Patient demonstrates advanced dementia, disorientation to time and place, confabulation of events. Julian hadn't seen me in 6 months. The last time we spoke, we talked about baseball. He had signed his name to a lot. Richard must have gotten to him, promised him a cut, or maybe paid off his student loans with my money. The corruption hadn't just infected my son, it had rotted the entire family tree. I read the hearing date. December 27th, 9 hours a.m. Emergency ex parte hearing. I had less than 48 hours, and it was Christmas. The courts were closed. The lawyers were home, with their families. I dropped the papers. They scattered across the table like dead leaves. I put my head in my hands. The fight ate out of me. What was the point? They had the money. They had the doctors. They had the lawyers. I was just an old man in an empty house, shouting at the wind. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe I was confused. Maybe it would be easier to just let them take it. Let them put me in a home. At least I wouldn't be alone. I looked up, my eyes blurry. The magnet on the fridge caught the light. Eleanor. She was wearing her blue sundress, standing on the porch of the lake house. She looked so small, but her eyes were fierce. Eleanor never backed down from a fight. When the cancer came, she fought it for 3 years, long past the point the doctors said was possible. She fought for every extra minute with me. Promise me, Arthur. I looked at the paperwork. Dementia, paranoia, incapacity. These weren't legal terms. They were insults. They were erasing me. I stood up. The chairs scraped loud and harsh against the floor. No, I said to the empty room. My voice was raspy, but it was steady. No. I wasn't a patient. I wasn't a statistic. I was Arthur Vance. I had kept hearts beating when they wanted to stop. I had raised 2 sons. I had loved a woman until her last breath. I wasn't going to let a gambler and a liar write the end of my story. I picked up the phone. I didn't call a lawyer. It was Christmas Eve. No lawyer would answer. I called Michael. Dad, he answered on the first ring. Get over here, I said, and bring your laptop. We have work to do. Dad, it's Christmas Eve. I know, I said. I looked at the pile of lies on my table. But we're not celebrating Christmas this year, Michael. We're going to war. Christmas morning broke gray and joyless. The sun struggled to pierce the heavy cloud cover, casting a flat, diffuse light over the snow. There was no tree in the living room, no stockings hung by the chimney. The only decoration was a stack of legal documents spread across the dining table, anchored by mugs of black coffee. I sat at the head of the table, wearing the same flannel shirt from yesterday. I felt a strange detachment, a numbness that I recognized from the operating room. When a patient is crashing, you don't feel sad. You don't feel scared. You feel cold. You become a machine of logic and action. At noon, headlights swept across the front window, Michael's Honda Civic, followed by a black sedan. Michael entered first, stomping snow off his boots. He looked exhausted, deep purple bruised under his eyes. Behind him walked a woman, who looked like she was made of steel wire and caffeine. Dad, this is Sarah Jenkins, Michael said. Sarah didn't smile. She didn't offer a platitude about Merry Christmas. She walked straight to the table, dropped a leather briefcase with a heavy thud, and extended a hand. Her grip was firm, dry, and professional. I'm expensive, she said, her voice raspy, like she'd been arguing cases all night. But I hate bullies, and I hate elder abuse. He says I had dementia, I said, sliding the petition toward her. He has a letter from Dr. Julian Vance. Sarah picked up the paper, scanning it with eyes that darted back and forth like a predator tracking movement. She scoffed. A short, sharp sound. Julian is compromised, she said. This affidavit is generic. Disorientation to time and place. It's boilerplate. He probably copy-pasted it from a template. She looked at me. I need you to answer a question, Arthur, and I need the truth. Is there any validity to this? Do you forget where you are? Do you forget names? I remember the name of every patient I lost in 40 years, I said. I remember the pressure settings on a heart-lung machine from 1985. I remember that Richard owes me $650,000. I am not forgetting, Miss Jenkins. I am realizing. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Good. We need a clean diagnosis. We need it today. It's Christmas, I said. Everything is closed. Not everyone, Sarah said. She pulled out her phone. Get your coat. We drove into the city in silence. The roads were empty, the world asleep in a holiday coma. We pulled up to a small brick building in the old medical district. A light was on in the back office. Dr. Evans was waiting at the door. He was my age, a general practitioner at the old school, the kind who still made house calls and remembered your grandchildren's birthdays. He looked grim. He unlocked the door, and ushered us in out of the cold. "I shouldn't be here," Evans grumbled as he led us to an exam room. "I should be eating ham." "Thank you for doing this, Robert," I said. He turned on me, his face flushing with anger. But the anger wasn't directed at me. "Richard called me," Evans said. I froze. "He did? 3 days ago, before he filed that petition." Evans washed his hands, scrubbing them violently. "He offered me $10,000, Arthur. A consulting fee, he called it. He wanted me to write a letter stating you were suffering from aggressive senility. He said it was for your own good, that you were a danger to yourself." "What did you say?" "I told him to go to hell," Evans said. He dried his hands. "And then I blocked his number." He pointed to the exam table. "Sit. Let's get this on the record." The next hour was humiliating, in its own way. I had to count backward from 100, by sevens. I had to remember 3 objects: apple, penny, table, and recall them 5 minutes later. I had to draw a clock face. I performed every task with the precision of a surgeon. I didn't just pass. I obliterated the test. Evans typed up the report, the printer humming in the corner. He signed it with a flourish and stamped it. Alert. Oriented X4. Cognitive function. 100%. Evans read aloud. He handed the paper to Sarah. "This holds up in any court. It proves Julian is lying." "We have our shield," Sarah said, tucking the document into her briefcase. Her eyes narrowed. "Now we need a sword." Back at the house, the atmosphere shifted. We had the defense. Now we needed the offense. Michael sat at the dining table, his laptop open. The blue light illuminated his face, making him look younger, like the teenager he used to be, hacking video games in his bedroom. "I know his password," Michael said. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "You do?" I asked. "He uses the same one for everything. Since high school. He's arrogant, Dad." "He thinks he's too smart to be hacked." Michael typed it in. "Wendell, INNER, 1985. Enter." The screen refreshed. Access granted. We crowded around the laptop. It was Richard's personal email, synced with his banking alerts. Michael scrolled. The silence in the room was absolute. "We were looking into the soul of my son, and it was a black hole. August 14. $50,000 wire transfer, Royal Casino Antigua. September 02, $85,000 DraftKings Daily Fantasy. October 15, $320,000. Loan repayment, A. Romano." "Romano," Sarah murmured. "That's a loan shark out of Hialeah. Richard isn't investing. He's drowning." "Look at this," Michael whispered. He pointed to an email from November. Subject, Notice of Default. Foreclosure Proceedings. It was an attachment from a mortgage lender in Miami. "He didn't buy a condo," Michael said, his voice trembling. "He's losing his house. The house he lives in with Jessica. He's 6 months behind on the mortgage." I leaned in, reading the fine print. The foreclosure auction was set for January 5th. "He stole your life to pay for his mistakes," Sarah said. Her voice was cold, analytical. "But this is motive. This proves he didn't take the money for your benefit. He took it to save his own neck." "Is it enough?" I asked. "Judges are conservative. Richard will play the concerned son card. He'll say he paid off his debts to stabilize his life, so he could care for me." "It's circumstantial," Sarah admitted. "He's a good liar. And with the conservatorship, the burden of proof is on us to prove you're sane, not on him to prove he's a thief. We need a smoking gun. We need someone who can testify to his intent." "Jessica," Michael said. "She's his wife," I said. "Spousal privilege. She won't testify. And even if she wanted to, she's probably terrified of him." "She is terrified," Michael said. He stood up, closing the laptop. "I saw her eyes when I was there, Dad. She's been crying for weeks. She knows about the foreclosure. She knows he stole your money. She's the only one who knows the whole truth." "She's in Miami," Sarah said. "The hearing is in 36 hours. Michael grabbed his car keys from the table. "I'm going to Miami," he said. "What?" I stood up. "Michael, no. It's a 20-hour drive. You can't." "I'll fly. There's a red-eye from Burlington in 2 hours." He looked at me. His jaw set. He looked so much like Eleanor in that moment. Stubborn, fierce, loyal. He destroyed this family. Dad, he tried to destroy you. Michael put a hand on my shoulder. I'm not going to let him win. I'm going to get Jessica, and I'm going to bring her back. If she doesn't want to come? Sarah asked. Then I'll beg, Michael said. He turned and walked out the door into the snow. The engine of his Honda roared to life, fading into the distance. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by legal papers and cold coffee. The sun was setting on Christmas Day. I looked at the empty chair where Richard used to sit. Winter 1985. You haven't won yet, son, I whispered to the dark. Not yet. The hours between Christmas Day and the hearing didn't pass. They dragged, heavy and scraping, like a sled pulled over dry concrete. I was alone again. Michael was somewhere in the sky, flying toward Miami. Sarah was in her office, drafting motions and subpoenas, turning her holiday into billable hours. I sat by the bay window in the living room. The snow had not stopped. It was piling up against the glass, a white wall rising inch by inch, sealing me in. The world outside was erased. No street, no trees, just a blank white void. It was the kind of weather that forces a man to look inside himself because there is nothing else to see. I thought about the word betrayal. It's a soft word, isn't it? It sounds almost gentle. But it isn't soft. It's a surgical incision. It opens you up and exposes the parts of you that were never meant to see the light. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I went into the boys' old bedroom. The twin beds were still there. The posters of baseball stars from the 90s were fading on the walls. I stopped at Richard's trophy shelf. First place, debate team, most likely to succeed, class president. I picked up the most likely to succeed trophy. It was cheap plastic painted gold, peeling at the base. We had been so proud. We thought success meant money. We thought it meant suits and corner offices. We never taught him that success was simply the ability to look in the mirror without flinching. I put the trophy down. It hit hollow. Tuesday, December 26th, passed in a blur of anxiety. I didn't eat. I drank water. I stared at my phone, willing it to ring. Where are you, Michael? Did you find her? Is she coming? The screen remained dark. If Michael failed, if Jessica refused to talk, or if Richard had gotten to her first, I was walking into that courtroom naked. I had Dr. Evans' letter, yes. That proved I wasn't crazy. But it didn't prove Richard was a thief. It just proved he was a liar, without the money trail, without the admission of where the cash went. The judge could rule that Richard had acted in good faith to protect a reckless father. He might not get the conservatorship, but he could walk away with my life savings, claiming it was a bad investment that he had authorization to make. I would keep my freedom, but I would lose my promise to Eleanor. The lake house would be gone forever. Night fell on the 20th. The wind howled around the eaves, shaking the gutters. It sounded like the house was groaning. I laid out my suit on the bed. It was charcoal gray, purchased for Eleanor's funeral. I brushed the lint off the lapels. I polished my shoes until I could see the reflection of a tired, scared old man in the leather. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the silence of the empty house. It was a terrifying silence. It was the sound of a life being dismantled. At 5:11 a.m. on December 27th, I got up. I showered. I shaved with a steady hand, despite the fear vibrating in my chest. I dressed in the funeral suit. I tied my tie. I went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it, fumbling. Message from Michael. Landing now. Meet us at the courthouse. Pray us. Us. He wasn't alone. I put on my heavy wool coat. I put on my hat. I unlocked the front door and stepped out into the freezing morning air. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crisp and sharp. I walked to my car. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp as a knife. I wasn't just a father anymore. I wasn't just a victim. I was the plaintiff. I started the engine. December 27th, the county courthouse. The building loomed like a gray tomb against the winter sky. The steps were granite, slick with a thin, treacherous glaze of black ice that the maintenance crew hadn't salted yet. I gripped the handrail. my leather gloves sliding on the freezing metal. I walked in with Sarah. The heavy brass doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the wind, but the air inside wasn't much better. It was stale, recycled air. It smelled of wet wool, floor wax, and the metallic tang of anxiety. It was the smell of people whose lives were being dismantled by paperwork. "Keep your face neutral," Sarah murmured as we passed through the metal detector. "No outbursts, no matter what he says. You are a statue." "I understand," I said. We walked down the long corridor toward courtroom 4B. My footsteps clicked on the marble. Click, 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 like a countdown. And then I saw him. Richard was standing outside the courtroom doors, conferring with his lawyer, a sharp-faced San in a pinstripe suit. Richard looked perfect. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that cost more than my first car. His hair was perfectly coiffed. His shoes shined to a mirror finish. He looked like the grieving, burdened son. He looked like the hero of a tragedy. He looked up and saw me. For a split second, I saw the panic in his eyes, the animal fear I had heard about from Martha. But just as quickly, the shutter clicked. The mask slid into place. His shoulders slumped. His face softened into an expression of profound, weary sadness. "Hi, Dad," he whispered. He stepped toward me, opening his arms. The audacity of it took my breath away. He was going to hug me. He was going to embrace the man he was trying to bury. I smelled his cologne, sandalwood, and money. It made my stomach turn. I stepped back. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my fist. I just looked at him with the cold detachment of a clinician, looking at a virus. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice was low, vibrating in my chest. Richard froze. He looked at his lawyer, then at the few people milling in the hall. He let his arms drop, a wounded look crossing his face. "See?" he said softly to his attorney, loud enough for me to hear. "Hostile, paranoid. He doesn't even recognize me as his son anymore." "Save the performance for the bench, Richard," Sarah said, stepping between us. She was a foot shorter than him, but she looked like she could snap him in half. "We're ready." We walked into the courtroom. Judge Miller took the bench at 9:05 a.m. He was a man carved out of old oak, heavy-set, balding, with eyes that had seen too many lies to be surprised by anything. He looked tired. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the docket. "In the matter of the emergency conservatorship of Arthur Vance," Miller read. His voice was gravel. "This is an expedited hearing due to allegations of immediate financial peril and self-harm." He looked at us. "Mr. Vance, the younger Mr. Vance, state your case." Richard took the stand. He didn't sit. He stood, gripping the podium as if he were holding himself up under a great weight. He took a deep breath. A tear, a single, perfect tear, tracked down his cheek. "It breaks my heart, Your Honor," Richard began. His voice trembled. It was a masterclass. "My father, he's my hero. He's always been the strongest man I know." I sat at the defense table, my hands clenched in my lap. "Statue," I told myself. "Be a statue." "But the decline has been rapid," Richard continued. "It started 6 months ago, forgetfulness, then confusion. Now, it's aggression." He calls me at all hours, screaming about money that doesn't exist. He claims he has hundreds of thousands of dollars in accounts that were closed years ago. He's obsessed with a lake house we sold 20 years ago. He thinks Mom is still alive sometimes. "Liar," I breathed. "Years." Farah put a hand on my forearm, squeezing hard. Silence. "I tried to help him manage his finances," Richard said. "I tried to protect him from predators. But he views my help as theft. He's paranoid, Your Honor. He thinks his own family is conspiring against him." "Do you have evidence of this aggression?" Judge Miller asked, leaning forward. "I do," Richard said. He pulled out his phone. I didn't want to record him, but the doctors said I needed to document the episodes. He connected the phone to the court's audio system. A crackle of static filled the high-ceilinged room. Then my voice. "You thief." "Where is it?" I asked for my home. "Put it back." The recording was from the call 3 days ago. But stripped of context, stripped of the provocation, it didn't sound like a righteous man demanding his property. It sounded like a madman. It sounded unhinged. Shrieking, violent. I am not confused, the recording screamed. You were gaslighting me. Richard stopped the playback. Silence hung in the room. Heavy, damning. Judge Miller took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me. His expression wasn't angry, it was pity. And that was worse. Mr. Arthur Vance, the judge said softly, that is alarming behavior. It was provoked, Sarah said, standing up. He was responding to the theft of his life savings. Alleged theft, Richard's lawyer cut in smoothly. There is no evidence of any funds existing. Your Honor, that is the delusion. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt the rhythm tachycardia. Too fast. I was losing. He was doing it. He was painting a picture of a reality that didn't exist, and the paint was drying fast. I looked at the stenographer, typing away my freedom. I looked at the bailiff, bored near the door. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was young, successful, articulate. I was the angry old man shouting at ghosts. I looked at the back of the room. The heavy oak doors were closed. Where are you, Michael? The clock on the wall ticked, 9:18 a.m. If there are no other witnesses, Judge Miller said, reaching for his gavel, I am inclined to grant the temporary order for protection. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was over, Your Honor, Sarah said. Her voice rang out, sharp as a scalpel. She didn't look at the judge. She looked at the doors. We have a witness. Richard's lawyer sighed. Your Honor, this is an emergency hearing, unless they have a medical expert. Not a medical expert, Sarah said. The doors at the back of the courtroom groaned. The sound echoed in the silence. They swung open. Michael walked in first. He looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed and hollowed out by exhaustion. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Richard. And then, stepping out from behind him, came the ghost. Jessica. She was small, shrinking inside a heavy winter coat that seemed 2 sizes too big. She wore large, dark sunglasses that covered half her face. She held her purse against her chest like a shield. The air in the courtroom changed instantly. It went from the sterile boredom of procedure to the sharp, electric charge of a downed power line. I looked at Richard. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of him. He gripped the edge of the defendant's table, his knuckles turning white. Objection. Richard's lawyer shot to his feet, sensing the disaster before he fully understood. Your Honor, who are these people? This is a closed hearing. This is the respondent's daughter-in-law, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise. Jessica Vance. Richard stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. Jessica, he said. His voice was tight, a command thinly veiled as concern. Jessica, you're not well. Go home. We'll talk about this later. She flinched at the sound of his voice. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Your Honor, Richard said, turning to the judge, desperation creeping into his tone. My wife suffers from anxiety. She is heavily medicated. She is not competent to be here. I am, a small voice said. It was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the room, it was a thunderclap. Your Honor, Richard's lawyer shouted. Spousal privilege. Even if she is here, she cannot be compelled to testify against her husband in a civil matter regarding. She is not here to testify as his wife. Sarah interrupted calmly. She pulled a document from her briefcase and slapped it onto the judge's bench. She is here as a hostile witness. And as of 8 a.m. this morning, she is filed for divorce in the state of Florida. A collective gasp went through the room. Even the bailiff straightened up. Richard looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He stared at Jessica, his mouth opening and closing. You did what? Mrs. Vance, Judge Miller said. He looked at the divorce filing, then at the trembling woman. Please take the stand. Jessica walked past Richard. She gave him a wide berth, pressing herself against the railing as if his touch might burn her. She sat in the witness box. She took off her sunglasses. I drew a sharp breath. Her left eye was swollen. Not fresh, but fading. A yellow-purple bruise that makeup couldn't quite hide. Richard looked away. Mrs. Vance, Sarah said, stepping forward. She didn't shout. She spoke softly, gently. You heard the petitioner's claims. He claims he moved Arthur Vance's money to an investment account. Is this true? Jessica gripped the microphone. Her hand was shaking so hard the stand vibrated. No, she whispered. Speak up, please, the judge said gently. No, she said, louder. There is no investment. Where is the $650,000? Sarah asked. Jessica took a breath. She looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were filled with tears and shame. He wired it to 3 offshore sportsbooks, she said. And the rest he used to pay the arrears on our mortgage. To stop a foreclosure? Yes. So the money was stolen to cover his own debts. Objection, Richard screamed. She's lying. She's crazy. She's off her meds. Sit down, Mr. Vance. Judge Miller roared. The gravel in his voice turned into a landslide. She has no proof. Richard shouted, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. It's hearsay. She's bitter because I have a recording, Jessica said. The room froze. Richard stopped mid-sentence. His arm fell to his side. A recording? The judge asked. From December 10th, Jessica said. She pulled her phone from her purse. The night he planned this, he was bragging about it. He thought he was smart. She plugged the phone into the aux cable on the witness stand. Richard made a move, a sudden lurch toward her. Bailiff, the judge barked. The bailiff stepped in front of Richard, hand on his holster. Richard froze, panting, trapped. Jessica pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. It was the acoustics of a kitchen, the hum of a fridge, the clinking of ice in a glass. Audio. Richard's voice. Baby, relax. Have a drink. The old man is losing it anyway. Who's going to believe him? Audio. Jessica's voice. But it's his life savings, Rich. He promised Eleanor. Audio. Richard. Screw Eleanor. She's dead. And he's halfway there. I closed my eyes. Hearing it was worse than knowing it. The callousness. The dismissal. Audio. Richard. I'll file for conservatorship on Christmas. Dr. Julian owes me a favor. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. Once I have power of attorney, the theft doesn't matter. I control the assets. I control the narrative. Audio Jessica. What will you do with him? Audio Richard. He'll be in a state nursing home. By February. I'll sell his house to cover the rest of the vid. He won't know the difference. He'll be too medicated to care. The money is ours, Jess. We won. Click. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb. I looked at the judge. His face had turned into stone. The pity was gone. In its place was a cold, righteous fury. He turned his gaze slowly to Richard. Mr. Vance, the judge said. His voice was dangerously quiet. Did you just admit, on the record, to premeditated elder abuse, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit fraud? Richard tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer. The lawyer was packing his briefcase. He wasn't going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. It was out of context. Richard stammered. Petition denied. Judge Miller said. He slammed the gavel down. Bang. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Denied with prejudice. Miller continued. And he pointed a finger at the bailiff. I am referring this evidence to the district attorney immediately. Mr. Vance, you are not to leave this building. 2 officers from the back of the room stepped forward. They weren't smiling. They walked up behind Richard. Richard Vance, one of them said. Turn around, hands behind your back. Richard looked at the officers. Then he looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The success story was gone. He looked like a child who had broken a window and knew the punishment was coming. Dad? He whispered. Dad, please. The handcuffs clicked. Click, click. It is a terrible sound. The sound of metal locking on bone. It is the sound of a life ending. I stood up. My legs felt heavy but strong. I walked over to the railing. I was 3 feet away from him. He looked at me with wet, pleading eyes. Dad, tell them it was a misunderstanding. I can fix it. I looked at him. I looked for the boy I had carried on my shoulders. I looked for the young man I had taught to drive. I saw only a stranger who had tried to erase me. I promised your mother I'd buy the house, I said softly. The tears spilled over his cheeks. Dad, I didn't promise I'd let you destroy me to do it. The officers took his arms. They dragged him away. He stumbled, his expensive shoes sliding on the floor. He didn't look like a Wall Street broker anymore. He looked like exactly what he was. A bad bet. I turned to the witness stand. Jessica was weeping silently, her face buried in her hands. Michael was holding her. I walked over to them. I put my hand on Michael's shoulder. I put my other hand on Jessica's shaking arm. It's over, I said, but as I looked at the empty doorway where my son had just been taken away, I knew the truth. The war was won, but the battlefield was covered in ash. The aftermath of a catastrophe is never loud. It is quiet, bureaucratic, and exhausting. Richard was arrested before he reached the parking lot. I watched through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse entrance. I didn't go outside. I couldn't bear the cold anymore. I watched the officers guide him into the back of a cruiser. He looked small. He looked like a man who had woken up in a nightmare, refusing to believe he was the one who had conjured it. When the cruiser pulled away, lights flashing silently against the gray snow, I felt a phantom pain in my chest. It was the feeling of a limb being amputated. It was necessary to save the body, but it was still a part of me that was gone forever. Arthur? Sarah touched my elbow. We need to sign some papers. I turned away from the glass. Yes, of course. The next 3 months were a slow, grinding purgatory of forensic accounting. Justice isn't a lightning bolt, it's a calculator. Sarah and a team of forensic accountants descended on Richard's digital life like vultures on a carcass. They picked through every transaction, every wire transfer, every hidden offshore shell. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee that tasted like metal, answering phone calls. We found $40,000 in a holding account in the Caymans. We clawed back the wire to the title company in Miami. The sports books are fighting the reversal, but we have the fraud affidavit. It was a slow trickle, a transfusion. By March, the snow began to recede, revealing the brown, matted grass underneath. The world looked bruised and raw. On March 15th, Sarah called. It's done, Arthur. How much? I asked. We recovered $620,000, she said. The remaining $30,000, it's gone, lost to the tables. There's no way to get it back from the casinos without a jurisdictional war that would cost more than the money itself. $30,000. The price of a decent car, the price of a year of college. Just vaporized. It's enough, I said. It's a victory, Arthur. Sarah reminded me. Most people get zero. I know, I said. Thank you, Sarah. I hung up. I looked at the checkbook. $620,000. I picked up the phone and dialed the realtor in Vermont. This is Arthur Vance, I said. I'm ready to make an offer. Cash. The closing was fast. The seller was an investment firm that had let the property rot. They were happy to offload the liability. On the 1st of April, I drove north. The drive was a journey through time. As I crossed the state line, the landscape shifted from the suburban sprawl to the rolling, pine-covered hills I knew better than the lines on my own palm. I turned onto the gravel road. The sign was still there, leaning precariously. Lakeview Drive. I crested the hill, and there it was, the house. It wasn't the glowing golden memory I had kept in my head for 20 years. It was a wreck. The white paint was peeling in long gray strips, like dead skin. The roof was covered in moss. The front porch, the porch where Eleanor and I had drunk 1,000 cups of coffee, was sagging on the left side. The support beam rotted through. Weeds choked the garden beds where her hydrangeas used to bloom. It looked tired. It looked beaten. I parked the car. The silence of the woods folded around me. No sirens, no lawyers, just the wind in the pines and the lap of water against the shore. I walked up the steps. The wood groaned under my weight. Creak. I unlocked the front door. The key turned with a stiff, rusty protest. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Dust. Damp cedar. Mouse droppings. And underneath it all, a faint, lingering scent of wood smoke from a fire that had burned out a decade ago. The house was empty. The floorboards were warped. A bird had built a nest on the mantel of the stone fireplace. I walked to the center of the living room. I stood in the dust. It was a disaster. It would take months of work. It would take sweat and money and an aching back. I smiled. I walked through the French doors to the back deck. The view hadn't changed. The lake stretched out, a sheet of hammered steel under the spring sky. The mountains on the far side were purple in the distance. The air tasted of pine needles and ice melt. I gripped the railing. It was rough, splintered. "I'm here, El," I whispered. The wind gusted, rattling the loose shingles above me. It sounded like an answer. I wasn't visiting. I wasn't dreaming. I was home. April arrived, not with a shout, but with a slow, steady warmth that seeped into the wood of the old house. The ice on the lake cracked, groaned, and finally vanished, replaced by water that reflected the blue of the sky. I spent my mornings on the deck. My hands, once used for delicate surgical tubing, were now rough with sawdust and callus. I was sanding the railing, stripping away 20 years of gray rot to find the red cedar underneath. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a meditative sound, a healing sound. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. The smell of fresh wood filled the air, clean, sharp, and alive. Gravel crunched in the driveway. I looked up. Michael's Honda pulled in, followed by a spray of dust. The back doors flew open before the car even fully stopped. Grandpa, small figures, rocketed out. Lily, age 8, and Ben, age 6. They ran up the porch steps, the hollow thumping of their feet, sounding like a drumbeat. I put down the sandpaper. I knelt down, my knees popping, and opened my arms. They collided with me, a tangle of limbs and laughter. They smelled of peanut butter and outs. "Careful," Michael called out, walking up the steps with a bag of groceries. "Grandpa is working. Work is good for the soul," I said, hugging them tight. "Go run down to the water. Don't go on the dock yet. It's not fixed. Stay on the grass." They scrambled off, chasing a butterfly that had dared to land on a dandelion. I stood up and brushed the sawdust off my jeans. Michael set the groceries on the patio table. He poured 2 mugs of coffee from the thermos he brought. We stood at the railing, watching the kids. For a long time. We didn't speak. We just let the sound of their laughter fill the empty spaces the winter had left behind. "How is he?" I asked finally. I didn't look at Michael. I looked at the lake. Michael took a sip of coffee. "The sentencing was yesterday." "I know. 5 to 7 years, Michael said. His voice was flat. "State prison. Fraud. Elder abuse. Forgery. The judge didn't go easy." "Good," I said. It was a hard word, a stone in my mouth, but it was the truth. "Does he ask for me?" "Sometimes," Michael said. He hesitated. He still blames the gambling. "Dad?" "He says it was the addiction. He says it wasn't himself. He thinks once he gets out, things can go back to normal." I watched a hawk circle over the water, hunting. "It's never them," I said softly. "It's always the bad luck or the addiction or the stress. They never look in the mirror." "I told him not to call you," Michael said. "I told him you have a new number. Thank you." I finished my coffee and set the mug down. "I'll be right back." I walked down the stairs, past the kids playing tag, and out onto the old wooden dock. It was rickety, swaying slightly with the movement of the water. I walked to the end. The water was deep here, dark and cold. I reached into my shirt pocket. I pulled out a photograph. It was creased, the corners bent. Richard, age 10. He was standing on this very dock. He was holding a smallmouth bass, his smile so wide it looked like it would split his face. He was wearing an oversized t-shirt and a baseball cap. He looked innocent. He looked like promise. I looked at the boy in the photo. I tried to find the man who had stolen my life in those eyes. I couldn't. That boy was gone. He had died long before the handcuffs clicked. I took a lighter from my pocket, my old Zippo. I flicked the wheel. The flame jumped up, orange and hungry in the breeze. I held the flame to the corner of the photograph. It caught instantly. The fire curled the paper, turning the smiling boy into black, crinkling ash. I watched the flame eat his face, his hands, the fish. The heat reached my fingertips. I let go. The burning photo fluttered down, hitting the water with a tiny hiss. It floated for a moment, a black scar on the surface, before the water soaked it and pulled it down into the dark. "Goodbye, Richard," I whispered. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a quiet, heavy release. The anchor was cut. I turned around. Up on the lawn, Michael was kneeling beside Lily. She was holding a hammer, looking at a loose board on the lower deck. "Like this, sweetie," Michael was saying, gentle but firm. "Don't force it." I walked up the bank. I stood over them. "Hold the handle lower," I said gently. "You get more leverage." Lily looked up at me, her eyes wide. She adjusted her grip. She swung. Bang. The nail went in straight and true. "I did it," she cheered. "You did," I smiled. I ruffled her hair. "You're a natural." I looked at Michael. He smiled at me. A real smile, not the tired, terrified grimace of Christmas. The family wasn't broken. It had been pruned. We had cut off the rot, so the rest of the tree could survive. And looking at my son and my grandchildren, I knew the roots were strong. I walked up to the porch. I sat in the old rocking chair I had bought at a flea market. I looked out at the view Eleanor had loved more than anything. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. I closed my eyes. I listened to the wind in the trees. "We made it, En," I said to the air. "We're home." And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't scream. It sang. Arthur's war is over, but the echoes of such battles linger long after the dust settles. It is a reminder that even when the roots rot, the tree can still find a way to bloom. If you felt the weight of this betrayal and the relief of its justice, let that shared connection be the reason you stay. Leave a like to honor the journey, and subscribe to join us for the next one. Because the truth is a heavy burden, but we don't have to carry it alone.